Hi there, and welcome back to Haunting Vales. Tonight's story begins with a book, a novel no one had ever read, because officially it never existed. Yet, one morning, a publisher received its final chapter, typed, signed, and stained with blood. When Hercule Poirot is called to investigate, he discovers that the author had vanished weeks before, leaving behind no manuscript, no notes. Only whispers of a story that was never meant to be told. Was it fiction or confession? And who decided the last page should end in death? Stay with us till the end. And if you love mysteries where words hold more than truth, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Haunting Vales. Chapter 1. The Whisper in the Library. It began on a rain-soaked afternoon in Oxford, the kind that turned cobblestone streets into mirrors and made even the grandest halls seem lonely. Hercule Poirot arrived at the university library not as a reader, but as a witness to something peculiar, a mystery wrapped in silence, sealed behind glass. He stepped through the tall oak doors. The echo of his footsteps was swallowed by the vastness of the place. Thousands of books surrounded him, stacked like quiet sentinels in endless rows. Dust danced in the thin beams of light that cut through stained windows. At the far end of the great hall stood Dr. Emmett Clark, the library's chief curator. His hands trembled as he adjusted his spectacles. "Mr. Poirot," he said, his voice barely steady, "thank you for coming so quickly. I hardly know where to begin." Poirot gave a small nod. "Perhaps, my friend, we should begin at the beginning." Dr. Clark swallowed hard and pointed to a display case near the center of the room. Inside, under spotless glass, sat nothing, only an empty cushion of velvet. "The missing item," Clark said, "a book, though it seems absurd to call it that. A book that may never have existed." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Never existed?" Clark hesitated. "That is what troubles me. We received a private letter 3 months ago from a man named Jonathan Greaves, claiming to possess an ancient manuscript, the Testament of Lazarus. He said it was written by an anonymous author in the 17th century. He offered to donate it to the university on the condition that it would remain sealed until his death." Poirot glanced at the empty case. "And he is now dead?" "Found 2 nights ago in his home," Clark said quietly. "An apparent heart attack. The police found no foul play. But this morning, when I came to inspect the manuscript for cataloging, the case was open, and the book gone." Poirot studied the broken lock, the marks on the display. "No signs of forced entry?" "None. And the key never left my possession." Poirot walked around the case, his reflection following him in the glass. "And you say the book might not have existed?" Dr. Clark pressed his hands together. "Because we never actually saw it. The manuscript arrived sealed in a wooden box. Greaves insisted it not be opened until he passed away. It was placed in the case exactly as it came. No one, not even I, saw what was inside." Poirot's eyes glimmered with curiosity. "So the disappearance of the book may not be the only deception. The deception may have begun much earlier." Clark nodded slowly. "That's what haunts me. What if there was never a book at all? What if this was all an elaborate illusion?" Poirot's voice was calm. "Then the question is not who stole the book, but why someone wanted us to believe it was real." As they spoke, a librarian named Alice Morton approached, young, pale, eyes red from lack of sleep. She held a folder of papers pressed to her chest. "Dr. Clark," she whispered, "I thought Mr. Poirot should see these." She handed the folder to him. Inside were photographs, grainy black and white images taken during the placement of the manuscript. In every picture, the box appeared the same. Carved, ornate, its lid sealed shut with black wax. But in one photo, Poirot noticed something odd. "The box," he said slowly. "In this image, the wax seal is broken." Clark frowned. "Impossible." It was sealed when I placed it inside the case. Poirot looked closer. Yet the photograph suggests otherwise. Someone opened it before it was displayed. Tell me, Miss Morton, who took these photographs? Alice hesitated. A photographer from the Gazette. A man named Henry Vale. He came the day the manuscript arrived. Poirot asked softly, "And where is this Mr. Vale now?" Her eyes darted downward. "He died last month. Found drowned near the riverbank. It was ruled an accident." The room fell silent. The rain against the windows sounded like faint knocking. Poirot stood motionless for a moment, then said quietly, "Two men linked to this manuscript, both dead. One by water, one by heart. Yet perhaps both by fear." That evening, Poirot and Dr. Clark visited the home of Jonathan Greaves, the man who had donated the mysterious book. The house stood at the edge of town, an ancient brick structure draped in ivy, its windows staring blankly into the rain. Inside, the air was cold, heavy with dust. A single fireplace glowed weakly. Poirot's eyes swept the room. Portraits, letters, stacks of books. Every inch spoke of obsession. On a small desk near the window lay an unfinished note. Poirot read aloud, "If anyone should seek the testament, tell them this. Truth is not written, it is buried." Poirot folded the note carefully. "Dr. Clark, this man played with words. He hints that the manuscript's truth was never meant to be read, perhaps because it does not exist." Clark looked uneasy. "Then what was in the box?" Poirot's gaze shifted to a long wooden shelf filled with identical boxes. Empty now, their lids open like mouths. "He was a collector," Poirot murmured, "but not of books, of secrets." In the corner of the room, Poirot found a single item that didn't fit, a typewriter newer than everything else. He examined the keys. One letter, the L, was worn almost to the metal. "Dr. Clark," Poirot said, "I believe our Mr. Greaves may have written the testament of Lazarus himself. Not a relic from centuries past, but a forgery created by a man who wanted immortality." "But why vanish it?" Clark asked. Poirot turned the typewriter ribbon slowly, as if rewinding time. Perhaps someone discovered his secret and made the book disappear before it could be exposed. They returned to the library late that night. The great hall was empty, shadows stretching long across the floor. Poirot inspected the display case once more. He noticed something small near the pedestal, a piece of paper almost invisible against the marble. He picked it up gently. It was a torn scrap from an old library ledger, marked with two faint words. "Room 312. Does this number mean anything?" Poirot asked. Dr. Clark blinked. "Yes, it's one of our private archive rooms. No one but staff is allowed there." "Then we shall visit it, if you please." They walked down the narrow corridor behind the main hall, their footsteps echoing softly. The air grew colder, the lights dimmer. When Clark unlocked the door to room 312, a chill seemed to seep from the walls. Inside were shelves stacked with forgotten books, unmarked boxes, and files of acquisitions long removed from public memory. Poirot's eyes moved slowly across the shelves until they stopped on something curious, a gap in the dust. One book had been removed recently. He leaned closer. There, faintly visible, was the outline of a rectangular shape on the shelf, the same dimensions as the missing manuscripts box. Poirot smiled slightly. "Ah, even when the truth hides, the dust remembers." Clark's voice trembled. "You mean the manuscript was stored here all along?" "Indeed," Poirot said, "displayed only as illusion. The real box remained here, hidden among the forgotten. Someone switched them, but who would know where to look?" Clark whispered. Poirot's eyes turned toward the corridor. "The one person who touches these shelves more than anyone else." A sound echoed behind them, soft footsteps, hesitant, growing closer. Alice Morton stood in the doorway, pale as paper, her hands clutching the frame. Poirot spoke gently. "Miss Morton, you came to us with the photographs. You wanted to help, but you also wanted to guide us, just enough." Her voice shook. "You think I took it?" "I think," Poirot said quietly, "you discovered it was false. You saw the typewriter marks in the letter, perhaps even realized Mr. Greaves had written it himself. And when you learned he was dead, you feared the university would be disgraced. So you made the book disappear." Alice's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't want to destroy his reputation. He was my mentor. He taught me everything." Poirot nodded slowly. "Then you acted out of loyalty, not greed. But loyalty built on lies is still a fragile thing." Dr. Clark stepped forward. "Where is it now, Alice?" She hesitated, then motioned toward the back of the room. Behind a row of ledgers, hidden beneath a draped cloth, lay the wooden box, open, empty. Poirot lifted the lid. Inside, on the velvet cushion, rested only a single white feather. Alice whispered, "I burned it." The words, they were dangerous. Poirot closed the box gently. Then the book never existed, and yet it changed everything. It created fear, death, deceit, a fiction that became more real than truth itself. He turned to Clark. "You must write your rapport, my friend. But do not write of a lost manuscript. Write instead of the illusion of knowledge, the danger of believing too deeply in what we cannot prove." Clark nodded solemnly. "And you, Mr. Poirot, do you believe she was right to destroy it?" Poirot's eyes softened. "Sometimes, Doctor, the wisest thing one can do with a lie is to let it turn to ash." Outside, the rain eased. The bells of Oxford tolled the midnight hour, and within the quiet library, the whisper of pages long unwritten faded into silence. Chapter 2. The Echo of Ashes. Morning broke over Oxford with a gray stillness, as if the city itself was holding its breath. The rain had stopped, but the air remained thick and heavy, carrying the scent of wet stone and smoke. Hercule Poirot stood at the window of his modest hotel room, his reflection framed by the pale dawn light. He had not slept. His mind had been circling the same question again and again. If the book never existed, why had two men died in its shadow? Why had a lie left a trail of truth so dark? The answer, he felt, still waited somewhere between ink and ash. When he returned to the library that morning, he found Dr. Clark waiting in his office, his face pale and drawn. On the desk before him lay the remnants of the wooden box. It had been removed from the archives during the night. "I wanted to see it again," Clark said quietly, "to make sure this isn't all some dream. But look," he pointed to the inside of the box. The velvet cushion that once held the feather was scorched, a black mark spreading outward like the petals of a burned flower. Poirot leaned closer. "Fire," he murmured, "and yet contained. Someone tried to burn what was already gone." Clark nodded. "I locked the archives after we left last night. Only I and Alice have the keys." Poirot's expression did not change. "Then one of you, my friend, has been most unwise." Before Clark could reply, a knock sounded at the door. A security officer stepped in, hat in hand. "Begging your pardon, sir," he said. "You'd better come to the riverbank." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "The river?" The officer nodded. "They found something this morning. Something that used to belong to your library." By the time they reached the edge of the Thames, the morning mist had lifted, revealing a small crowd gathered near the stone bridge. Police officers stood beside a tarp covering an object pulled from the water. When the tarp was lifted, Clark let out a broken gasp. It was the missing manuscript box, or rather, what remained of it. The wood was warped and blackened, the velvet inside shredded and soaked. There was no sign of paper, no trace of writing, only a faint smell of oil and ash. Poirot crouched beside it, his gloved fingers brushing the edges. "Someone wished this to be seen," he said softly. "A performance of destruction." Inspector Hadley, the The local police officer overseeing the case folded his arms. Seems like whoever did this wanted to erase every bit of evidence. Poirot straightened. Or to make us believe that they did. The inspector frowned. You mean it wasn't burned here? Poirot's gaze drifted to the current of the river. No, the water would have carried it far, but this, he tapped the edge of the box, was placed carefully near the bridge, not thrown. We're meant to find it. Dr. Clark's voice trembled. But why? Poirot looked at him. Because the performance is not over. And we, my dear doctor, are now the audience. By midday, news had spread through the university. Students whispered about a cursed manuscript, a vanished book that killed anyone who touched it. The gossip grew faster than reason could follow. Poirot moved through the corridors like a shadow, listening, observing. Fear, he knew, was a useful tool. Someone was using it masterfully. He found Alice Morton alone in the cataloging room, her hands trembling as she filed old documents into drawers. The smell of smoke lingered faintly on her clothes. You could not sleep last night, Poirot said quietly. She looked up, startled. How did you? The eyes, mademoiselle. They betray the hours that the mind refuses to rest. Alice tried to smile, but her voice faltered. You think I went back to the archives? I think you were frightened, Poirot replied gently. But fear does not always belong to the guilty. Sometimes it visits the innocent who know too much. She hesitated, her fingers gripping the edge of the drawer. There's something you should see. From her pocket, she took out a small folded paper, edges brown by heat. It was all that remained of a burned page. A few lines were still visible, the ink warped and blurred. Poirot unfolded it carefully. The words were written in a deliberate hand. He who writes truth must first destroy it, for the written word is a mirror too clear. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Where did you find this? Alice hesitated. In the furnace room, this morning. Someone had tried to burn it completely, but it must have fallen behind the grate. Who knew where the furnace was? Poirot asked. Everyone in the maintenance staff, she said, and the curators. But why would anyone? Before she could finish, a voice called from the doorway. It was Inspector Hadley, his face grave. Mr. Poirot, there have been another death. They followed the inspector across campus to a narrow service corridor behind the library. Two officers stood near a locked storage door. Inside, the smell of gas hung in the air. A man lay slumped against the wall, a wrench beside him. His clothes were stained with oil and soot. His name, the inspector explained, was Walter Briggs, the library's maintenance foreman. He was the one who handled the furnace, Hadley said grimly. Looks like he tried to fix a leak, passed out, and the fumes took him. Poirot knelt beside the body. The man's right hand was clenched tightly around something. Poirot pried it open. Inside was a crumpled note, a half-burned scrap, matching the style of the earlier page. This one read, "The truth must drown with the maker." Poirot stood slowly, his face unreadable. The play continues, he said, and the stage grows darker. Hadley frowned. You think these are connected? Poirot looked toward the gray sky beyond the window. I think someone is killing to preserve a story that was never real. Back in the library office, Poirot placed both burned scraps side by side. The handwriting was identical, neat, old-fashioned, and precise. Clark hovered nearby. Could Greaves have written them before he died? Poirot shook his head. No. Look here, the ink bleeds too recently. The paper is from the university stockroom. These were written after his death. Clark's voice grew faint. Then who? The author continues to write, Poirot said softly, and he is among us. He turned to Alice. You told us you burned the manuscript, but you did not. Did you perhaps hide a fragment? One page. One line. She shook her head violently. No, Isuia. I couldn't bear to look at it again. Poirot studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. Very well, but if you think of something, you must tell me. The danger is not in the words themselves, but in the hands that use them. That night, The library was closed to the public. The corridors were silent, except for the ticking of an old clock. Poirot stayed behind, sitting in the main hall with the lights dimmed. He watched the reflections on the polished floor, listening to the slow rhythm of time. And then, just past 11, a faint sound echoed from the archives, the creak of a door. Poirot rose. He moved silently down the hall, past the reading rooms, toward the archives. The air grew colder, carrying the faint smell of smoke again. When he reached room 312, the door was ajar. A single lamp burned inside, casting long shadows across the shelves. In the center of the room stood Dr. Clark. His hands trembled as he held a small notebook, one Poirot had not seen before. "Doctor," Poirot said quietly, "you should not be here alone." Clark looked up, his face pale. "I found this in the restricted section. It's his handwriting, Greaves's. I thought it was just his research notes, but look." He opened the book. The pages were filled with words written in black ink, precise and hurried. On the first page, in bold letters, it read, "The Testament of Lazarus, copy draft." Poirot's voice was low. So the book existed after all. Clark shook his head. "Not as we thought. This is no ancient manuscript. It's Greaves's confession. He wrote about forging the story, creating the myth, and about someone helping him." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Helping him?" Clark nodded. "A collaborator. He only refers to them as the Watcher." Before Poirot could speak, the lamp flickered. The sound of a door slamming echoed through the corridor. The light went out. Darkness swallowed the room. Poirot heard movement, quick, sharp, then the crash of glass. He pulled out his pocket torch, its beam cutting through the dark. The notebook lay on the floor. Clark was gone. "Doctor?" Poirot called. No answer. He stepped into the corridor. At the far end, a shadow moved, swift, vanishing into the stairwell. Poirot followed, his footsteps echoing. But by the time he reached the lower level, there was nothing. Only silence. It was after midnight when Poirot stood again in the main hall. The library felt emptier than ever, its silence heavy with meaning. On the desk before him lay the notebook he had recovered from the floor. He turned its final page. A single sentence waited there, written in a hurried hand. "When the ashes speak, the truth will follow." Poirot closed the notebook gently. He knew now that the mystery was far from over. Someone had rewritten the story of the Testament, and this time they were writing it in blood. As he looked toward the darkened windows, thunder rumbled in the distance, low and deep. Somewhere in Oxford, another hand was already moving across the page, preparing the next chapter of a book that was never meant to exist. And Poirot knew, before the final word was written, more would die. Chapter 3. The Book That Spoke the Dead. The storm that had haunted Oxford through the night broke, just before dawn. Rain fell in sheets against the windows of the Bodleian Library, the ancient glass shivering under each distant growl of thunder. Hercule Poirot stood alone among the dark stacks, his silhouette lit faintly by a single lantern. The smell of wet stone and old parchment filled the air. Before him, on a wooden table, lay the Testament of Lazarus, the notebook Dr. Clark had discovered hours before he vanished. The handwriting danced across the pages like a confession bleeding through time. Poirot's gloved fingers turned each page slowly, absorbing every word, every hesitation. It was a story written by a man desperate to be believed, and afraid of what his own creation had become. The Testament was a lie, Greaves had written, but in creating it, I gave life to something that would not die. Poirot's expression hardened, a lie that became belief, and belief that became murder. He heard footsteps behind him. Turning, he found Inspector Hadley entering the hall, his coat dripping from the rain. "They've found him," Hadley said quietly. "Dr. Clark, down by the mill road. Looks like he fell from the bridge." Poirot's eyes did not move from the notebook. "Fell, or was pushed?" Hadley sighed. The river washed him up near the embankment. There was a blow to the head. We'll know more once the coroner's done. Poirot closed the notebook carefully. Then the circle tightens. Hadley frowned. You think Clark was the killer? No, Poirot said softly. I think he was the last witness. By mid-morning, the rain had eased. Poirot stood by the library's great fireplace, studying the burned scraps that had been found earlier, the pages that warned the truth must drown with the maker. He arranged them beside Greaves's notebook. The handwriting was the same, but the ink slightly fresher. Someone had copied his style. The Watcher, a presence that had been with Greaves as he built the myth of the Testament of Lazarus. Someone who now continued the work. Poirot turned as Alice Morton entered the hall, pale and hollow-eyed. They said Dr. Clark is dead, she whispered. Yes, Poirot replied, and his death was not an accident. Sit down, mademoiselle. She hesitated, then obeyed, folding her hands in her lap. Poirot regarded her for a long moment. Tell me again what you did after leaving me last night. I went home, she said. I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing that box, those burned pages. It felt like the book was still watching. The book does not watch, Poirot said gently. But someone does. Someone who has been here all along. He leaned closer. Tell me, Alice, who had reason to destroy Greaves? She shook her head. He was brilliant, but difficult. He fought with the other curators. He said they were blind, that they didn't understand what he discovered. Poirot nodded slowly. And yet, he discovered nothing. He only invented. That is the cruelty of false genius. It devours its own believers. Alice's voice trembled. Do you think Dr. Clark was part of it? Poirot's gaze softened. No, he was a man of guilt, not deceit. He kept Greaves's secret out of shame, not ambition. But our murderer, they're different. They hide behind belief, because belief is safer than truth. She looked up at him, fear widening her eyes. Then who is it? Poirot said nothing. He looked again at the notebook and saw what he had missed before. On the inside of the back cover, faintly imprinted by pressure, was the trace of another hand. Someone had written something after Greaves's last entry, pressing down hard enough to leave a ghost impression in the leather. He tilted the book toward the light, and slowly the letters appeared. The final chapter is mine. Poirot's breath caught. Mon, he stopped himself, then whispered, Good heavens. He turned sharply toward Alice, who has been in the archives since Clark disappeared. Only me, she said, and the security staff. Poirot moved to the window. Outside, the storm had turned the streets into rivers of light. Then, my dear Miss Morton, it is time we spoke to the one who guards the silence. The library's security chief, Mr. Edmund Hart, was a man of few words and fewer smiles. He met Poirot and Hadley in the lower corridor, where the walls smelled of damp stone and old oil. I hear you're asking questions about last night, he said, his voice calm but distant. Poirot studied him. You have worked here long, 15 years. You knew Greaves? Everyone did. Eccentric fellow, always up late, reading. Didn't think much of rules. And Dr. Clark? Hart nodded. Good man. Too curious for his own good. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. And Miss Morton? Hart hesitated. Bright girl. Greaves liked her work. Spent a lot of time helping him in the restricted room. I told her once that section's cursed. She laughed. Poirot took a slow step forward. Mr. Hart, you were on duty the night Greaves died, were you not? The man's jaw tightened. Yes. And you reported hearing nothing, seeing nothing. That's right. Poirot's voice softened, but his eyes gleamed. And yet you keep the only master key to the restricted rooms. Even Dr. Clark had to request it from you. Hart's expression did not change. That's procedure. Yes, Poirot murmured. A procedure most useful to one who wishes to control who enters and who does not leave. A long silence followed. The hum of the lights filled the space like a low, steady heartbeat. Then Hart said, "You think I killed him?" Poirot smiled faintly. "I think you believed in him, in what he created. But when he told you it was false, when he tried to end the myth, you could not allow it." Hart's eyes darkened. "You don't understand. He was right at first. The testament meant something. It gave people faith again. But he wanted to burn it, destroy everything we'd built." He took a step closer, his voice trembling. "So yes, I stopped him. I did what was needed. He said the truth would die with him. And it did. Until Clark tried to dig it up again." Poirot's tone remained calm. "And you killed him too." Hart's jaw clenched. He wouldn't stop asking. Always questioning, always searching. He said he found the notebook, but that was never supposed to exist. It was a test. A story that ends only when no one remembers it. Hadley took a step forward, hand near his revolver. "Mr. Hart, that's enough." But Hart only smiled faintly. "You can't arrest an idea, Inspector." He turned his gaze to Poirot. He said the ashes would speak. "Well, they will tonight." And before either man could move, Hart struck the lantern from Poirot's hand and ran down the corridor. The light shattered. Flames licked up the walls as the oil spilled across the stone floor. After him, Hadley shouted, drawing his weapon. Poirot followed, his breath sharp against the smoke. The corridor twisted through the lower levels of the library, down toward the furnace room, the same place where the first burned pages had been found. The door stood open, glowing orange from the fire inside. Hart was there, throwing stacks of papers into the furnace. The Testament of Lazarus notebook lay open in his other hand. "Stop!" Poirot's voice echoed, but Hart didn't turn. "It ends here," he shouted. "The words, the lies, they'll die like he did." He hurled the notebook toward the flames. But Poirot moved faster. He lunged forward, grabbing it before it touched the fire. Hart turned, eyes wild, and rushed him, but Hadley tackled him to the ground, wrenching his arms back. The struggle was brief, desperate. Then silence. Poirot stood, breathing heavily, holding the scorched notebook in his gloved hands. The firelight reflected in his eyes like twin embers. "It is finished," Hadley said. Poirot shook his head slowly. "No, Inspector. Not finished. Only understood." Hours later, the library was quiet again. Smoke still clung to the air, but the flames were gone. Hart had been taken away in handcuffs, his eyes vacant, as if he'd burned out his own soul. Poirot sat alone in the reading room, the rescued notebook before him. Many pages were singed, but the final line remained intact, Greaves's last words. "A book exists not when it is written, but when it is believed." Poirot closed it softly. "So, it ends," he murmured, "not with ink, but with faith. And faith, once poisoned, can kill more swiftly than any blade." He looked toward the gray dawn outside. Oxford was waking. The rain had stopped. The world, it seemed, had turned another page. As Poirot prepared to leave, Alice approached quietly, her eyes red from weeping. "So it was him," she said softly. "All this time. The Watcher." "Yes," Poirot replied. "A man who mistook a lie for meaning and meaning for truth. That is always the danger of creation." She nodded slowly. "What will happen to the book?" Poirot smiled faintly. "It will go where all lies go, mademoiselle, into the silence of memory." He placed the notebook into an evidence box, sealing it shut. "But remember this. The most dangerous stories are not the ones we write. They are the ones we choose to believe." Later, as Poirot walked alone down the misted street, the bell of Christ Church told the hour. The rain had left the cobblestones gleaming like glass. He paused once, glancing back toward the library's tall spires. In one of the high windows, a single light still burned, faint, flickering, like the last breath of a dying thought. Poirot tilted his hat against the drizzle and whispered, "Let the dead rest, and let the book that never existed never be written again." He turned and walked into the morning fog. If you were with Poirot till the final page of the book that never existed, tell us in the comments what you think was the real truth behind the manuscript. Was it ever truly gone? Or does belief keep it alive? If you love mysteries wrapped in shadows, subscribe now and join us again when the next secret unfolds.